Okay, so we'll move then to Siobhan Gaynor. Siobhan is a member of Cancer Trials Ireland Patient Consultants Committee and is going to talk to us about her experience in running a patient-led research project. Siobhan. Thanks, Siobhan. We'll get the slides organised.
So thanks very much, everyone, and let me just outline my experience to date in working on this project. So as many of you are aware, 4 years ago now, almost 4 years ago, numbers count in this space, I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, which is pretty devastating. So tried to turn it into something positive. But actually, more importantly, what I witnessed as a primary breast cancer patient the year before was an amazing service, mainly nurse-led, where I felt supported and listened to. And I was confident that the protocols were adhered to, and there's plenty of protocols out there. Wonderful job done by the NCCP and all of you in shaping that service. But what I recognised was the following year, in fact, in a more vulnerable position with an incurable cancer, there are no standards. There's no guidelines. It's handled very differently at centres around the country. There are no statistics, how many of us are around. There was a complete black hole of data. Of course, I recognise fully that a lot of that is because, in fact, advancements have been made in this space. And frankly, a decade ago, my prognosis would have been a matter of 2 or 3 years. So many of us now with this condition, and indeed all stage 4 cancers, are living longer. So the question arises what to do with us and how to handle us. So I recognise the time is not now. So of course, as a scientist by background, right, let's get the evidence. So in fact, this time 2 years ago, I approached Professor Seamus O'Reilly at this exact meeting and said, I have a few ideas as a patient, would you support us? And he very graciously accepted to what was really not very coherent sense of ideas, but we managed to sort it out and think about it and speak to other patients, more importantly, about what was important to them. And what we realised was, in order to shape our service and our needs going forward, first of all, we had to figure out what our needs were. N=1 is never going to work. So my experience was never going to be enough to persuade anybody to invest in a service for our care and investing in guidelines. So we really need to think about what was the fastest way, but the most effective way to engage us. And we kind of settled on a survey as a relatively fast and simple method to engage patients and also to get a turnaround. And I want to highlight that timeline because I think that's very important. So that was 2 years ago. Next week, we have 2 posters being presented on our research at ESMO Breast. And 2 weeks after that, 2 more posters at ASCO. Thank you. But it's amazing. It's amazing in so many ways. But actually, timelines are important. And timelines are important to patients. In terms of expanding services, in terms of looking at what patients need, that's very important. So whilst, of course, the gold standard is always going to be and always will be a randomised controlled clinical trial, the delivery of that from concept to implementation, as we all know, is 10 years and getting longer and longer, actually. So from idea to actually having something to provide to a patient. So I would urge you to consider timelines in your considerations in terms of looking at methodology, but also to explain to you, this was the first ever patient-led project that Cancer Trials Ireland took on. That was no mean feat. There's no SOPs, there's no standards. How do we do this? So we figured it all out. But, actually what really made it happen in a 2-year span was everyone opened their hearts and their minds and she said, right, we'll make this happen. And that was the level of commitment and flexibility, as we're talking about, in regard to future funding. And I think that's really important. But also in terms of the data, and obviously I can't speak too much about it until the meeting next week, but in terms of the outcome, surprise, surprise, a lot of the assumptions that clinicians who've engaged with me on this survey have made about the same patients in my situation are completely wrong. In fact, people often speak about, oh, well, you're a disparate group, different needs. Actually, we're pretty, unanimous in what we want, and the numbers will show this in the next few weeks. We're very clear on where our needs lie. In fact, we're pretty united on what our needs are. So that was very interesting, but also not surprising to me, because that's exactly what I felt. It's kind of blindingly obvious, some of this stuff, but actually we needed the data to prove it. So I just want to encourage you all to open your heart, keep opening your hearts and your minds, but remember that there's other methodologies, and remember that whenever you're doing a randomised controlled clinical trial, which is obviously the gold standard and requires the most amount of investment, resources, etc., just keep in mind that there's many add-ons and bolt-ons that you can do as well, and just remember that, patients at the end of the day are the ones who will keep telling you what their needs are, and it's not always about length of time that we live. Very often quality of life is actually far more important to many of us in this situation. So I want to thank you all, because it's amazing to be here. I get emotional, I'm sorry, because I just can't believe it, but I wouldn't be here without all of you. And just bear in mind that there's multiple ways to skin a cat, and the more people around a table, I've worked in research all my life, and the joy of it is the different voices. So please keep including all the different voices at the table. Please keep asking people, is there a better way or a faster way or a more interesting way to do things? Keep asking questions and keep being curious. Thank you.
Thanks, Siobhan. To get a study in 2 years is an incredible achievement, and we're very envious that you've been able to do that, so congratulations.